So I just wanted to sort of set, so we have sort of a power hour. I wanted to sort of set maybe a couple goals that we could ambitiously try to get through today. So the first goal is to try to, if I were teaching this at a school, I would want to start with some maybe foundational scripture to root our conversation. So have us reflect together on some foundational scriptures which to root this work. Then to sort of dive into the science. So I'm going to not take Anthony's advice to heart today. I'm going to not present in parable. I'm going to try to be as clear and as plain and as like simple as I possibly can be. It'd be helpful to hear back from you at the end if you think I've pitched it too high or too low. The topic is incredibly complex, and I'm making it sort of simple today, not because it isn't complex, but I just want to give you some highlights about the science today. The other goal is to sort of talk about the placenta and have you recognize the placenta as an amazing organ. It's a fetal-maternal organ, which means it's mom and baby coming together to make an organ, which is amazing, and tell you a little bit what the placenta does. And then also talk to you a bit about maternal adaptations in pregnancy. So it's an amazing miracle how the mom's body has to adapt and change in multiple systems to be able to foster new life. I'm going to talk a little bit about the complex immunological interface between the mom and baby, and the way that I'm going to sort of highlight this is talking about something called fetal-maternal microchimerism. So we'll talk about that at the end. And then really the purpose of all of this is really to inspire awe in God's creation and its beautiful design in us. So to paraphrase St. Augustine, he said something like, which is beautiful, that men go abroad to wonder at the vastness of the mountains and of the long courses of the rivers and of the majesty of the waves. But they pass by themselves without really wondering, you know? And so I thought of Claire's talk yesterday and all the majesty of nature and God's revelation. But do we wonder about ourselves and how intricate and complex our bodies are? And the science is really amazing and really just highlights God's majesty. So that's sort of my main goal of all of this today for you. So to start with foundational scriptures, anybody have any favorite scripture that maybe anchors our work today that highlights the importance of the prenatal child, for example? Yes?
I could do 3.
Great.
Jeremiah, before I knew you in the womb, I called you to be a prophet to nations.
Beautiful.
I forget the Psalm number 1 something. I made you in your mother's womb.
Psalm 139.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And then from the first few verses of Ephesians, before I created the foundations of the world, I destined you to be holy and blameless in the Lord.
Thank you.
And I use those regularly when I
love
teach
that.
Prenatal.
I love that. So I taught an undergraduate seminar for 3 years called Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, Things of Medicine in the Old Testament. And so I love Psalm 139. So thinking about that, when you talk to your students about us being knitted, God knitted us together in our mother's womb. Does anyone here knit? I knit. It's a beautiful craft. So what does it take to knit something together? Somebody? Patience. What else? Knitting is an act of love. It's an act that takes some immeasurable creativity, and each thing that you knit for somebody, if you ever knit somebody a scarf, for example, everyone's different, beautiful. Yes.
Attention to detail.
Attention to detail. Claire?
It takes a long-term vision of what it's going to be,
Yeah.
and attention to that, not just in its vision, but in the execution and the regulation of that.
Intentionality for sure. Yeah.
I crochet.
Yeah, totally.
I'm realizing this, that I made a little pink blanket, and I'm making a little blue blanket for my godchildren.
Yeah.
But it's been a really powerful thing, like praying for them. Like
Yes.
every time I'm doing it, I feel
Yes.
I'm not
I do
doing
that
anything
too.
else. And I'm just realizing that it's scriptural. It's really cool.
Beautiful.
I'd say even though the pattern's the same, the actual fabric is
Right.
different, so everyone comes out unique.
Yes. Everyone's unique.
I was thinking about kind of the opposite point. Sometimes you're just focusing on that and it's more contemplative. A lot of times I notice I don't knit or crochet, but I notice people who do it are talking or doing something that kind of reminds you of your mom cooking, and she's also talking and helping you do homework. And I guess, right now, where the knitting is happening right now, even while I
Yes.
I'm already knitting.
Children say amen to that,
You
yes.
can often do something else
Right.
and be unaware
Yes.
of this thing.
Beautiful. I love that. It's so great.
It takes time, so the more intricate the pattern, the longer it takes.
Yes, and the intricacy is just immense today.
I'm somebody who didn't appreciate or like knitting the first time I tried it because it didn't turn out the way that I expected it to. Like I was
Right. Yeah, for sure.
But for me, it was a process of kind of letting go and figuring out how to let it be what it was supposed to be.
Love that. These are all beautiful thoughts. Other scripture around the prenatal, the importance of the prenatal child in the redemptive story at all? Or
When Jack leaves to the womb.
yes, yes. So I have a cartoon that I use sometimes, like a picture of, it's beautifully drawn of Elizabeth and Mary and the two children in the womb, and how John the Baptist is the first person to recognize the Christ child. So the importance in the redemptive story of the prenatal child there is so beautiful, right? And the other thing too is, right, we think about the Word became flesh, and our Savior was in the Blessed Mother's womb. And so everything that through the incarnation that Jesus passed through, he redeemed. And so the uterus is a redeemed, sacred place because it revealed the glory of God. So that would be, I would hope this topic would be sort of an exercise in academic cross-training where you could talk about it in your theology classes and talk about it in your science class and such, because it beautifully intersects. Okay, so we're gonna start just by, I'm gonna try to use the whiteboard here to draw a picture so we get an idea of where we're starting from, like on the macro level, on the big picture. So if one of your students asked you, what is the uterus, what would you say? What is it? What's the uterus?
It's the home. It's the home. It's the place where a baby grows.
Yeah, exactly. It's a home.
Protected, nestled.
Right? Good. What else is uterus? In scientific terms, what is it? Yeah, so it's made of muscle, right? So the uterus is an organ, okay? So uterus is an organ. It is located in biological women in their pelvis, unless it's been removed through hysterectomy. It has a muscular wall, right? So I have 4 children, and thank goodness for the uterus to be able to help as a muscular organ to push the baby out. Has a corpus or a body. And then what's the opening of the uterus called? What's that area called? The uterine cervix, right? Okay. And so we're going to be talking about the placenta. So I'm going to put the baby in her mother's uterus. And so the baby is growing. She's alive. She has a heart, as Charlie said, not some kind of fetal pole. It's actually a 4-chamber heart. And so she is in amniotic fluid, right? So she's in a sac of fluid. And when the baby is in the fluid, the baby still has needs, right, that need to be met. So the baby needs, what does the baby need to grow? If we think about her growth, what does she need?
Nutrition.
She needs oxygen. Oxygen, she needs nutrition. So oxygen, how do we get oxygen? From breathing. Is the baby breathing? She's breathing, so not the same way. Tell me more about that.
Maybe I would compare it to the movie The Abyss, where they breathe sort of liquid substance instead of air.
Okay, so the baby's lungs actually, right, are filled with amniotic fluid, right? So they're not oxygenating the same way we have a bellows effect with our lungs, right? Or perhaps the pressure opens and we bellow and lungs take in oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide. That's not happening, right? So the baby still needs to be able to get oxygen. So we think about that need. The baby also needs to eat. Is the baby eating? Is the baby taking food in through his or her mouth and eating through a lumen of the GI tract? No. Okay, so the baby needs to somehow get food. What else does the baby need to do? Yeah, so baby needs oxygenation, baby has carbon dioxide or waste, right? Baby has to get rid of waste. So when we think of how this happens in fluid, right? What has to happen, or what kind of organ then happens to be formed with the cooperation of God and mother and baby to meet these babies' needs? What kind of organ are we going to talk about here? The placenta, okay. So the placenta, if you think about the baby has an umbilical cord, right? The umbilical cord is actually really, have you guys seen an umbilical cord? It's beautiful, It's beautiful, just amazing. It's like, looks like this spiral cord. And it has 3 vessels in it, which I'll show you. And it comes back from the baby's umbilicus, or belly button, to the placenta. And so the placenta is this amazing organ that I'm going to sort of talk to you about today, that basically meets all these needs that we talked about the baby has to have: oxygenation, elimination of waste, providing of oxygenation and nutrients. And the placenta is attached to the wall of the uterus. And what I'm going to show you about the placenta is that the placenta is the first time that the baby and mom reach out to each other and physically build something together. So it's the first time actually there's cooperation between the mom and baby. So most people will refer to the placenta as a fetal-maternal organ, right? So the placenta historically has been called the afterbirth, right? Because what happens is when you give birth through vaginal delivery, right, the baby comes out, and then the placenta comes out next. So it's after the birth. And so it was sort of like thought of as an afterthought. New York Times had a really cool article a couple of years ago that said placenta, an afterthought no longer. It's really getting a lot of new attention, actually. So many of you obviously know that there's National Institutes of Health is like the biggest sort of scientific sort of place in the world and funds all the biomedical research. Francis Collins had the NIH. There's a part of the NIH that Eunice Shriver, a state funded, so Eunice Shriver NIH branch for child and human development, they actually have something called the Human Placenta Project. And it's just a massive multi-million-dollar project to look at actually the placenta because it's so important actually. And there's tons of money for funding and for people who do placental research because it really is the key to a healthy baby and to a healthy mom actually. And so the placenta is, we're going to talk a little bit about it today. I'm going to sort of show you how it develops, and this is something that you could teach in your class. So we're going to take a look at the, just briefly, at the cord first. So the umbilical cord actually has 3 vessels in it, 2 umbilical arteries and 1 umbilical vein. And so this is like a cross section through the cord. So this is the umbilical artery, and this is the umbilical vein. And it's housed in this cord in this substance called Wharton's jelly. A normal umbilical cord can be about 2 feet long. The placenta, if you look at a gross specimen of a placenta, placenta comes from the Latin word for cake or flat cake. It's about 1 pound. So we're going to take a look at a very detailed aspect of the placenta. So I'm going to draw something for you. Basically is a cut through this section that I'm going to expand. And I'm going to show you how the placenta is made. Okay. So I'm going to flip this image a bit. I'm going to put the uterine wall at the bottom, all right? So if we have the uterine wall here, so this is the uterine wall. And again, this is the muscular part of mom. This is her uterus. And the uterus, because it's very thick and very muscular, has its own need for a significant amount of blood supply. So there are uterine arteries that come through the wall of the uterus. So this will be uterine artery. And then, of course, for return circulation, there are uterine veins. Put a couple of here, just a simple schematic here. This is a uterine vein. And then there's the first part I'm going to draw you is actually still mom's tissue. I'm just going to shade this in here. So this is going to be the first part of our placenta. This is called the basal plate, and this again is mom's tissue. And then something really cool happens. So normally, if you think about your red blood cells, they are all intravascular, which means they're not just like floating around in like just some sort of abyss. They're actually all housed within like a lumen of a vessel, okay? But what happens when the placenta is being made is there's this pool, and these red blood cells are coming out of the uterine arteries, and they're just sort of floating around here, okay? And what do red blood cells carry? What do they have in them? Oxygen. So first and foremost, they're going to be carriers of oxygen, okay? So they're free floating in this pool, which is quite amazing because usually, again, the red blood cells are always housed within vasculature, Okay, and then we had, if you recall, we had the baby up here. Okay, the baby's up here. The baby's cord is here with her vessels in it. And then the baby sends down tissue into here. We're gonna call this the chorionic plate. And the chorionic plate has baby's vasculature that's reaching out to mom. So I think of like mom and baby like reaching out. I thought of that of the Sistine Chapel yesterday. That's what I thought of actually. I thought of this when you guys were showing that as a scientist, but of like the hand reaching out that Michelangelo was painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, of mom and baby like reaching out for one another in this beautiful first connection. So baby is like reaching down, and what happens is there are these cells here, this pink, which is again baby, the trophoblasts. So the trophoblast cells reach down and extend out into this shared space of this pool. I'm just gonna draw with a lot of surface area, so it comes down. And then what happens is these vessels can come into this area. And what's so cool then is if this is baby's blood supply, right? And this is mom's blood, these things can come into very close physical proximity, okay? So for example, if mom's red blood cell floats up to here, what can happen is oxygen can diffuse and nutrients can diffuse across, and the baby can send her waste, her carbon dioxide, out. And so gas exchange can happen, which is really cool. So instead of us, we are breathing, and that's how our gas exchange happens, gas exchange is happening this way. So this entire segment, this entire thing is the placenta. So you can see it's like part mom, part baby, together entering into encounter at the cellular level to make this amazing organ called the placenta. And so what does the placenta do? Well, it's amazing because it is many organs in one. So if you think about the functions of the placenta, we sort of highlighted some of them already. So the placenta acts as a place where gas exchange happens, gas exchange. It's a place where nutrient exchange happens. It's a place where thermoregulation happens. So I don't know if you know this, but the baby's temperature is entirely maternally dependent until the baby is born. So it happens through the placenta. The fourth function of the placenta is immune function. So the immunology here is incredibly complicated. I could talk about that for like 10 hours. But just for the purpose of today, the immune function of the placenta, a couple things I think to highlight. One thing is there are different types of immunoglobulin or antibody, and I don't know, I've lost track of how in-depth high school science is around these topics, but you could expand upon this, right? So IgG is like your antibody that you make that's like long-term immunity that's there after you basically have seen and fought an infection successfully. You have IgG, okay? IgM is like the new antibody you make if you were just exposed to like an infection. So IgG can pass across the placenta and IgM cannot. So mom's immunity, her inherent innate immunity actually benefits baby. It actually crosses across the placenta. So baby benefits from mom's immunity in this way. The other thing the placenta does, it has metabolic functions. So some of these functions include protein. So it's amazing. Protein is like one of the building blocks for life and for cells. The placenta makes several grams of protein a day. It also makes cholesterol. And then for you scientists out there, cholesterol is actually a very important precursor for a lot of hormones that we need to live. And then it has endocrine functions. So the placenta makes tons of things, but just for today, a couple things to highlight. It makes HCG. Do you guys know what the hormone HCG is? Yes.
I just want to go back to the immune function. Is that, because I know there's kind of companies out there who will like save the placenta after the baby is born. And what is the point of, what is the purpose of that?
I will talk to you about that later. It's very complex. There's ways that you can save cells from the placenta that if someone basically needs a stem cell transplant later on, someone had leukemia, they have their cells radiated, that they could have an autologous transplant, or if a baby sibling was sick, they could use those cells for cancer and that kind of thing to regenerate cells. A little bit different, although cancer is innately tied to immunity, it's a little bit different than this. Do you have a question, sir?
No, I wanted to answer your question. HCG.
Oh yes, HCG, sorry, yeah. What is that?
I forget exactly what it's called, but isn't it a hormone that's picked up by most pregnant?
Yes, that's right. So it's human chorionic gonadotropin. And so that, right, exactly is the hormone that is picked up when you take a pregnancy test. So you can pick it up on the urine test, or your doctor can order a serum. We call it a serum beta. It's called a beta HCG. You can get a serum beta. In a normal healthy pregnancy, the beta doubles. As you can tell if a pregnancy is viable or not. It doubles every couple days. So good, makes HCG. The placenta makes estrogen. Estrogen is really important for healthy pregnancy. It helps the uterus grow. And then progesterone. Progesterone is incredibly important for us to talk about. Progesterone helps actually as an immune modulator. So if you think about the baby and the placenta, right? The baby is part mom, right, and part dad, but it's a unique person. And so normally if there is something in your body that's not you, there's rejection that happens. And so progesterone actually helps to downregulate some of these immune cells that otherwise would attack the baby. So the progesterone helps to downregulate the immune system. It's an anti-inflammatory, and also while it's sort of there, it prevents the uterus from contracting. So you do not want the uterus to contract until the baby is at term and ready to be born. So it prevents uterine contraction. So this is amazing because your lung is amazing, your kidney is amazing, right? Those are all amazing, but the placenta is like the kidney, the lungs, the immune system, the endocrine system, like so many things in one. And so that's why the NIH says it's arguably one of the most important organs like in the whole body because of what it does. So that's just beautiful. So I want to talk a little bit about then what has to happen then in the mom's body for this all to work properly. So I'm just going to erase over here. So let's think about some of the maternal adaptations to pregnancy. So these are the adaptations that happen in mom's body for her to support baby. So these are going to be the maternal adaptations. Okay. So a million things have to happen for this to work, and it's amazing that this happens and goes right most of the time. But just a couple big buckets for you to think about. The first one there are some hematologic adaptations. So this is in the blood system. So your blood, so how many, like in a normal, it's different what your body size if you're a man or woman, but about how many gallons of blood do you have in your body at any one time, do you think? 2.5. 2.5?
That's like 60 pounds, I forget.
So the average person has a little over a gallon, it's not that much really. You have like 1.2 to 1.5 gallons of blood. And your blood, your intravascular volume is like plasma and then the cells, right? So like just very simply, the plasma is like the straw-colored fluid, the host that houses like your immunoglobulin and some other things. And then there's the cells, like there's the red blood cells, the white blood cells, your platelets, and all together they make up the blood. The plasma, it's not exactly half and half, but the plasma is about half of the volume and the cells are half of the volume. So in pregnant women, do you think that they need more plasma volume or less plasma volume? More volume in your arteries and veins? Do you think you need more of that to support pregnancy or less of that, and why?
Maybe less but you need more liquid. Is that possible?
Okay, let's think it through. Yeah, so what do you think that there's a need for more circulating volume, and why, or less? And why? More? Why would that be? Because why?
There's another person.
You're sharing.
Yeah, I like that. There's another person, right? And you've just created this like massive, like other circuit that needs tons of perfusion. Like all these spiral arteries have like grown and like expanded. You're perfusing this whole other system. And you as the mom, you're responsible for like handling not only your waste and all the baby's waste, right? So actually need more circulating volume. So in women, there's an increase in plasma volume.
Doesn't that increase happen even though before pregnancy? Like, isn't there a thickening of the uterus that's the whole preparation for?
Yes, yeah. So every time you basically have a cycle, technically, like your body's like ready, getting ready, right? Right. So the plasma volume increases. So this liquid volume in the tube is increasing. We also talked about there's more need for oxygen, sort of back and forth. So we also increase our red blood cell mass. But what happens is the plasma volume increases more in proportion than the amount of red cells. So what happens if you have like a box that has liquid and like particles in it, and the liquid part expands more than the cells? Am I getting dilute or am I getting more concentrated? Dilute, yeah. So actually, these go up, but the volume, the intravascular volume of the plasma expands even more. And so you will have more of a dilute solution. So actually, because of that, actually, you get a dilutional, it's called physiologic anemia of pregnancy. So a lot of women in pregnancy get anemic, and it's actually just part of this normal physiology. And the reason for that is because you don't want super thick blood. So viscosity is like, right, the thickness. You think about the viscosity of your oil in your car. Like if you think about all these like little capillaries and such, you don't want like a lot of cells clogging that liquid up. You want a less viscous volume because you don't want to clog off any of those little tubes that are going to the placenta and such. And it sort of decreases the cardiac workload to have more of a dilute solution. But you want more volume. And you also want more volume because like what happens when you give birth? Do you lose volume? You lose volume. You lose volume. So basically the mom's body is actually making more volume to protect her ahead of time because when you give birth, you lose a lot of volume. So she's protecting that. There's a little bit of a buffer there, right? Actually, what's really cool is actually right before delivery the placenta sort of auto-transfuses a lot of blood back to the mom right before too, to give her a little bit of extra push of blood. So it protects her against some postpartum loss. And then also, what happens when, I'm staring at our lovely pregnant lady in the back, I just think of you the whole time, and you're just like a walking miracle. But if we think about the baby, when you're carrying a baby, and the baby obviously is several pounds in your body, in your abdomen and pelvis, the baby is sort of sitting up against the vessels like in your body, right? And there are two big vessels that like run up the course of your body. Like one's your aorta and one's your IVC or your inferior vena cava. And veins are always like thinner walled, right, than arteries are, and so they're more easily collapsible. And so what happens is, why do they tell sometimes pregnant ladies not to lay on their backs when they're approaching term? Do you know why that is? Yeah, so when you lay back, right, that heavy gravity uterus like smashes down against the IVC. And if you don't have blood return coming back through that vein to your heart, you drop your cardiac output and you feel you can pass out, or you basically don't have circulation at the very basic level. So they tell pregnant ladies to lay on their side, that kind of thing. So they think possibly that this increased plasma volume sort of protects against this risk of decreased venous return as the gravid uterus gets bigger, right? Okay, so that happens. So the plasma volume increases, the red blood cell mass increases. Do you know what you need, what your body needs to make red blood cells? What are like the building blocks of red blood cells? Iron, good. What else? Yeah, so protein, folate. So prenatal vitamin, right, has a lot of those things in it, folate and some of the B vitamins. You also need erythropoietin, what the kidney makes. So there's an increase in both of these. The other thing in the hematologic group that I would put in here that I think is important for us to know is that pregnancy, there's an increase in some clotting factors. So again, you could talk about which clotting factors, there's this whole clotting cascade that we talk about in medicine all the time, and certain clotting factors are increased in pregnancy. So at any minute when we're sitting here, you guys, there's like the crazy balance all the time between you bleeding and clotting. It's like we're all just like by God's grace, hanging on. Like, it's amazing to think about just one system. But you can imagine what happens when basically women deliver and this placenta rips off and goes out and delivers. My gosh, like all this blood supply has been pouring. This tears away from the uterine wall. Women can develop postpartum hemorrhage. And if you've ever seen it, it's incredibly devastating. Women die from postpartum hemorrhage, right? And so you have to be able to protect women against that the best you can. So women's bodies increase some of these clotting factors to prevent postpartum hemorrhage, which still happens, a big cause of maternal morbidity. But so pregnancy is in some way pro-thrombophilic, right? So you hear about pregnant ladies getting blood clot, DVT, pulmonary embolism because of this issue. So the second thing that happens is in I'll call it the cardiovascular system. So pregnancy is a stress test for the heart, basically. It is. It's pretty hard to have pregnancy if your heart is not fully functional. So what happens in pregnancy is cardiac output is, there's a formula, is heart rate times stroke volume. So your cardiac output is how much volume your heart pumps out in like a unit time. So if you think about very grossly, your heart has 4 chambers. Your right atrium, your right ventricle, your left atrium, your left ventricle. And we care about all the chambers, but the chamber that we focus a lot of our attention on is the left ventricle. That's like the workhorse side of the heart. That's the side that basically is pumping blood into the aorta, which is where your oxygenated blood goes, and it goes to your carotids and your femoral arteries and your renal arteries. And so the stroke volume is with each beat, how much blood is being pushed out of the left ventricle into the aorta with each beat. Your heart rate, obviously, is your heart rate. So an average adult heart is beating 60 to 100 beats per minute, depending if you, more or less, if you're more athletic or on medication or anxious or that kind of thing. And then so your cardiac output is like per minute, how much volume is coming out of this heart. So we already talked about that this intravascular volume is higher, right? And so there's more stroke volume, right? Women's heart rate in pregnancy goes up a little bit too, and therefore her cardiac output is tremendously increased. And you can't mount a good cardiac output, for example, if you have a narrowed aortic valve, right? Speaking of valvular heart disease in women, or if you have a narrowed mitral valve, or if your heart otherwise is sick. So mom's heart really has to work a lot harder here, because again, she's perfusing and she's working, right? So the other system that increases is the pulmonary system, has adaptations. So what happens to women's diaphragms, and if you've ever had a pregnancy, when you feel like your uterus is like just taking over your abdomen? Do you feel like really like you can breathe super well? No, you feel like you cannot breathe super well. So what happens in your thorax, right? If these are your lungs, your diaphragm is sort of like, usually they're sort of domed and they sort of raise up, and actually because of estrogen's effects on ligaments and such, your rib cage sort of expands, never gets really quite back to normal. And you basically have like a flattening as the gravid uterus comes up. And progesterone actually is a known driver actually of increasing respiratory rate also. And so what happens is people start breathing faster and they have increased tidal volume. So your tidal volume goes up. So your tidal volume is how much air like you're moving out of your bellows, out of your chest between inspiration and expiration. And so when you if you've ever hyperventilated before, they tell you to like breathe into a paper bag. You know why that is? Have you seen that?
So you take carbon dioxide?
Yeah. Because if you just blow off all your carbon dioxide, you start to feel like really like woohoo, like lightheaded, right? So if you breathe, so the bag is a way to capture some of the carbon dioxide as you breathe it back in. So if you breathe faster and your tidal volume goes up, you actually drop your PCO2. And that's called, again, I don't know how deep into your science classes you go with this, but that's called a respiratory alkalosis when you drop your PCO2. And what happens if you drop your PCO2, again, I want to have CO2 diffuse from baby, right, because that's the waste, out into mom. And so my diffusion gradient actually will be much greater if I can drop mom's CO2. So actually it widens, dropping this actually widens that diffusion gradient and makes the CO2 more able to shift and diffuse out of baby's blood supply into the pool and then be sucked back into mom's circulation to be gotten rid of. So it actually helps this waste sort of function of the placenta work better. And then the fourth maternal adaptation is in her renal system. So do pregnant ladies feel like they have to use the bathroom more or less than your average person? More. And why is that? Now, given all that I showed you, like, why is that, do you think? Yes, more liquid. I love that. That's exactly how I talk, because there's just more liquid that's flowing through, right? There's more volume. So actually do you know how many centimeters an average human kidney is? Centimeters. I keep going from like gallons to liters, centimeters to like all these different things. So it's about 11 centimeters. So in pregnancy, actually the kidney size actually increases by 1 to 1.5 centimeters. Crazy that like organs like can change size, right? And then the pelvis, the renal pelvis, which is like the opening to the kidney, actually widens. And that also is from our lovely progesterone effects. And then what happens, right, is because there's just more, the kidneys are filtrating, again, mom's waste, but also baby's waste, and there's more volume in the intravascular space. And so mom has nocturia, she has to go to the bathroom a lot in the middle of the night, and then also obviously the uterus is pressing on the bladder because both the bladder and the uterus are in the pelvis. So there are a lot of reasons mom has to go to the bathroom, but the renal system adapts wonderfully to all of that. So those are just some of the adaptations that happen in pregnancy. Yes, sir.
With various body systems that are impacted or adapting to pregnancy, when people are transplant recipients, what sorts of things have to be considered? Or once the organs are functioning, we just sail right through? I mean, are there any things that need to be looked at?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very complex question. It depends what organ was transplanted, what the underlying disease was that was the indication for the organ transplant. The immunosuppressive medications, obviously a lot of them are teratogenic, the age of the mother. So that's very complicated, yes. But through amazing medical science, and again, God is the author of all the science. He is the author of immunology and physiology and anatomy, and we are just discovering what he has created. There are amazing advances where women have had successful pregnancies, obviously post-transplantation, but it's very complex, right? That's why we have the beautiful field of maternal fetal medicine to help us with these ladies and such. So in just the last 15 minutes, less than that even, I want to just talk about one thing more about this picture that I think is the most exciting part. So I've shown you a little bit about how mom and baby cooperate together to form this placenta. Talked about how mom's body adapts with her organ size and her respiratory rate and her cardiac output and such to be able to grow the baby. But there's this one more topic that I wanted to talk to you about that's really just so beautiful. I never get tired talking about it. So if you think about God's creation and his story, I see so many relationships within the story. And it would be a wonderful exercise to talk to your students about like their favorite picture of relationship within the scriptures. Do you guys have any of your favorite picture of like relationship in scripture that you want to tell me about?
Like people?
Yeah.
Ruth and Naomi?
Yes. You do. Great. Other relationships? So I think about if I were to be teaching this to someone, I would start obviously with like the picture of, God walking in the cool of the garden with Adam and Eve. I would think about God with his people in the Old Testament in so many various ways. One of my favorite, as a physician, I love thinking about Jesus as the great physician and how he role models what medicine should be. But I love a picture of him in Mark where he's with the man who is blind and he's going to heal him. And Mark says that he takes the man by the hand and walks with him out of town. And I think, what did they talk about on that walk out of town? Jesus, because he was divine, could have just healed people just because, and he didn't even have to even know them or touch them, but he has relationships with people. There's the wonderful, mysterious relationship of the Trinity, of the persons of the Trinity. There's a wonderful picture of Jesus in relationship with his Father through prayer. And so if we think about God's whole story is built on relationships, we would be, I think, naive to think that his creation also would not be totally relational, even down to the level of the cells, right? And that's like what we see in this picture of something I'm gonna talk about next, which is microchimerism. So does anyone know the chimera in the Greek mythology story? What's the chimera? It's like the beast, right? It has 3 parts, and it sort of varies. But I think the part is it's like 3 animals in one. The chimera in Greek mythology is like the head of like sort of the goat, and there's like the body of like the lion tail, the serpent, or something like that. So it's like 3 in 1. So in science, a microchimerism is the presence of a small population of genetically distinct, separately derived cells within an individual, okay? And so if you think about what happens in pregnancy, the placenta is this organ through which mom and baby interface. And very early on in pregnancy, some of the baby's cells go into mom, okay? This is so cool, you guys. So this is basically this picture. And I think about David's talk yesterday, I've been thinking about this all today because I'm thinking about what I was gonna say about this, that we're all interconnected. And we think about Catholic social teaching of like we're all connected to each other, and this is to be alive means to not be by ourselves. So people's cells, we think about human beings, used to think of them as like singular autonomous individuals, but a lot of us are walking around with remnants of other people in our bodies. And so what happens is baby cells come into mom early and often. And this is an area of science that just is beginning to be understood, but there are some early effects of these cells in mom's body, and there are some late effects of these cells in the body. So the cells enter mom's body, and then they go and integrate into various tissues in mom. Now it'd be one thing, and then they act. It'd be one thing, it'd be really cool to think about that it's a gift, I would say, this idea of gift, that the cells from my 4 boys entered my body, let's say, and then they just were there. That would be amazing enough. But you guys, these cells in this microchimerism, not only do they enter mom's body, but then they help her and then they work in her body. So for example, some of the early effects that have been shown is some of these baby cells will go into mom's body, find out where mom needs help and help her heal. So these cells will go into, for example, if mom had a cesarean section, the cells will go into her cesarean section wound and like start making collagen, help mom heal from her C-section. I mean, I just want to like fall on the ground and cry over that, you guys. It's so beautiful, so beautiful. And so amazing, right? And then we think about like later effects that like moms, we think about women, for example, in medicine, and we think about breast cancer. And we know there are a lot of risk factors for breast cancer. Do you guys know what those are? Some of those are. Family history, BRCA mutation, being a woman, being older, obesity, alcohol, but never having had children is a risk factor for breast cancer, being a nulliparous woman. Breastfeeding protects against breast cancer. So if they looked at these microchimeric cells and they found that women in their breast tissue that had more of these fetal microchimeric cells, these cells from their baby, had less breast cancer. So to think about that mom risk of breast cancer is actively being attenuated by her baby and by her child's cells that are in her body still working in her. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. They think these cells, actually the presence of these cells can affect the spacing of other children. So like the siblings are interacting at the cellular level, right? So there's some type of cooperation, negotiation at the cellular level that's happening that we're just starting to understand. And some of the research isn't so rosy. They think that some of these cells may affect mom's immune system, and maybe they're looking at some other models about risk of disease in the brain if these cells are there. But regardless, it really blows up our idea of people being autonomous, singular individuals when a lot of people are walking around with remnants of other people in their bodies. It's crazy. It's crazy. Like blows your mind, right? And so this is bidirectional too. So when they looked at this one study, about 8 to 10% of women had male cells in their body, and these women said that they had not had any male sons, and they don't recall ever having a termination or a miscarriage. So how did these women, if they hadn't born sons, how did they have male cells enter their body? Well, the researchers hypothesized that this could have happened from a couple different things. One is that they could have had what's called a vanishing male twin, So sometimes women actually, when they get pregnant, do have like twins, and male babies are more susceptible to loss than female babies. And so they basically lost a male child and they didn't know, and then they didn't know they were pregnant. Or what's even crazier is that if like Sally, let's say Sally is the woman we're talking about and she has male cells in her body. So when Sally's mom was pregnant with Sally's brother Joe, so her older brother, right? Joe's cells came into Sally's mom and then came into Sally because she's the younger sibling. So you could have cells in your body from like your siblings. And so these microchimerisms like get more and more complex, which is really beautiful. And so, when I think about this topic, to wrap up here, I think about, the science really. Jess asked me yesterday about how my view of science has, affected my faith. And it's really the other way around. I mean, you guys are so lucky to teach in like Catholic schools to be able to integrate these topics, but it's really like my faith, I think, that really has shaped the way I view science, right? Because like science, as we talked about yesterday or the day before, doesn't really give us any idea of like, the why. The science shows us like the how, but like the why is answered through the scriptures and through theology and through knowing God. And I think that this science really just helps me be in awe of the Creator, shows his amazing love and beautiful design for us, and shows us things, and we're just beginning to understand, that shows that we are relational and connected in a way that we, even down to the cellular level, that highlights God's beautiful picture in Scripture and his story. So thank you so much for listening to my science story today and for your attention today. Thank you so much.
We have just a few minutes.
Sure.
And I'm going to ask the first question.
Oh, sure.
So this is the third time I've heard this presentation, and it's amazing. Every time I feel like I learned something new. The same thing for Sister Anne. Could you explain, as you told me yesterday, about the voice of the mother and the effect that has on the prenatal and postnatal child?
I would love to talk about that. So the most intense acoustic experience that the baby has in the amniotic sac is of her mother's voice. And babies develop probably their sense of hearing of intrauterine sounds from inside the mom's body at around 18 weeks, and then can hear things like outside mom's body probably around 24, 26 weeks. And there's something really special about mom's voice to baby in a way, again, that I think highlights this beautiful interconnectedness. So we don't know a ton about what happens in utero. It really is like we're just beginning to understand that. So some of this information that we get from prenatal children that are born prematurely and research that is done looking at their development, and we can hypothesize that that's what happens in utero. So for example, there was a study that looked at babies that were born premature, and they were in the NICU, and they were in their isolette. And the intervention babies, those groups, they recorded the mom's voice and heartbeat, and they played that for those babies several hours a day. And then the control group was just exposed to just ambient hospital sounds. And at the end of the study, the premature babies that had been exposed to mom's voice, actually part of their brain, the auditory cortex, was thicker and bigger than the babies that had just heard the ambient sound. So the fact, again, you guys, that your voice can make people's brains grow, I just can't believe it. It's so beautiful. And not only can it make the baby's brains grow, but they had another study where they had premature babies have very oftentimes unstable cardiopulmonary systems because they're brand new. And so they're prone to have apneas where they sort of stop breathing, or bradycardia, which is their heart gets really sort of slow. And they found that when babies were listening to mom's voice, either active or recorded mom's voice, versus the time, so they were their own controls, versus the times they weren't listening to mom's voice. When they were listening to mom's voice, they had less episodes of bradycardia and apnea. So again, the mom's voice can affect the circuitry of the heart and the brain. The voice, that's powerful. I always tell my students that it's 2019, we have all the science in the world, but the thing in the NICU that helps our babies grow and thrive the most is skin-to-skin contact. When the ladies come and volunteer and help pull babies on their chest, I mean, it shows like we are meant to like be connected and like to touch and to hold. I mean, that's the most powerful thing with all the machines and like medicines we have, that's the most powerful thing. Crazy. And then the last thing about the mom's voice that was so amazing is I had babies that were premature, and they exposed them. They put like EEGs and electrodes on the baby's face and head, and so they could see what parts of the brain were like active with sounds. And so they had two sounds, both feminine sounds. So one of the sounds was recording of the baby's mom's voice speaking. And then the other was a recording of another feminine voice. It was like usually the nurse that was responsible for bringing the baby to the nursery. And when the baby heard mom's voice, part of the brain lit up that was like, yes, I recognize speech is happening. But the part of the brain that lit up when she heard mom's voice, when the baby heard mom's voice, was actually the part of the brain that's involved with like language acquisition and language development. Whereas if she just heard the feminine voice, it just was like speech recognition, speech recognition. Mom's speech language acquisition, actually formation plus recognition. So again, and those are totally two different hemispheres of the brain. So the plasticity and the way that your brain develops actually is influenced by the voice of your mom. And we were talking a little bit yesterday on tape too about how like, because there's this artificial placenta project going on, and like if we think about artificial technologies, how that might change babies' brains if they're not really in utero listening to mom's voice. It's gonna be fascinating to hear and see. But the fact that we can affect people's growth of their brain and their organs with our voice, and how that's special for the mom, it's just like the coolest thing ever. Yes.
How long does it take all of this to develop, or is it constantly developing?
So for which the placenta to be made, for example. Yeah, so the placenta is made pretty, like I would say, not super early. I mean, that's the beginning of it is early, and the placenta is developed, obviously, like early on to be able to support life. So this happens in the first few weeks. These adaptations are happening like all the way through, actually. So the babies, this isn't, what's so beautiful about this is it's not just like a once and done, like a static picture. Pregnancy is like an active, dynamic, changing picture. So these things are very like, they're happening throughout pregnancy because you have the demands as the baby grows, the demand on your body grows. So it's actually, these adaptations, I would say, are like throughout gestation. This happens early, but this is an active process, but this happens very early. And then the microchimeric cells, they think that transfer happens early. So we were talking about how devastating miscarriages and fetal loss for people. And we've probably all known, I mean, I know people obviously as you do who've had loss of pregnancy. And I think people always knew, moms always knew that their baby was still with them in some way. Now we really know that the baby is still with these moms, you guys, with these cells that have crossed, and they're always with her. Yeah.
Is there any indication that the microchimeric cells are stem cells or from the free germ layer?
Yeah, so they're pluripotent. They're pluripotent cells, and that's why they can integrate into a tissue of the mom and become thyroid or breast or collagen or brain. Yeah. And that's why it's so amazing that they don't just go in and like they're inert. They go in and then they act and they stay active.
This is a tiny bit of this side, but you know, the whole field of embryonic stem cell research is really quite a failure. But adult stem cell research is really quite successful. And I wonder if there's a tie-in right here, because it's fairly new, I'm assuming, about what those cells are doing at that pluripotent stage that they can't do in vitro, but that they can do in vivo. I don't know, that's just...
Yeah, no, that's a whole like symposium just on that topic.
Right, I mean, that's a whole place makes me want to do research again.
I know. It's just beautiful. It's just all these implications of like how this works in God's design, and if we take things out of God's design, how they don't work. Sometimes, right?
I have a question too.
Oh, go ahead, yes.
I just have a comment. I had heard several years ago on NPR, of all places, about the research of cells from children living in their mothers for decades. And beyond. And,
right.
And so I often share that story with my future teachers, my pre-teachers, when they talk or start asking about how do I interact with parents. because that's always a nightmare and for them, especially when many of these students are becoming teachers and they're young enough to be the children of parents that they're facing in the classroom. And I always tell them what they have to understand is that a child is a physical extension of the parent, that those cells continue to live in the mother especially. And so when that mother is coming in upset and concerned about their child, it's usually a reaction of fear. Is there something wrong with my child? Did I do something wrong with my child? You know, or is there something wrong with you and my child? And so they just have to listen and look at that as the child's success is the parent's success, and the child's struggle is the parent's struggle as well too. And if they look at it in that light, it's a lot easier for them to cope with that emotional upheaval of a parent who is coming in that's upset and angry at them. So
yes, I love that. And I agree, NPR and some of the more mainstream outlets have a lot of very easily digestible articles about the fetal maternal chimerism for people to read if you're interested in looking at those from a sort of a layperson type of view. Yes.
So we're at the end of our hour.
Thanks.
One shameless plug for another ICL program. We do have a science and religion seminar that trains teachers and administrators in the integration of science and theology. You can look in your workbook, but it's a great program. Kristin, we might be tapping you for that as well.